Greetings, my name is JC,
And I'm Ian.
and this is the Gamer's Gaiden. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking about RPGs. But before we get into that, just a little bit of a call to action. If you'd like to help us out, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and share the content with other people that you think would enjoy the content. Yeah. So, Ian, what have you been playing this week?
I've been playing a lot of Dragon Quest Builders 2, JC.
Awesome. How's that game been going?
It's awesome. I mentioned it last week in our episode about stuff that we really enjoyed in 2019 so far.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's great. The building mechanics are a lot of fun. The quests and objectives, even in the like free play area,
Right.
there's still so much for you to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of non-optional stuff you got to do there.
You like the main questline stuff?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
in the free play section. But
Right.
once you clear out those like story guided things,
Yeah.
there's like a ton of optional extras that you can do.
Cool.
And just like the way you learn new recipes,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that like each different or island that you go to is you redevelop it.
Oh, okay.
Then there's new problems on each island that you're working around. Yeah, it's incredibly enjoyable.
Awesome.
I haven't had a chance to jump into the multiplayer yet,
Mm-hmm.
but I am looking forward to it. From what I understand, it is very similar to Minecraft, where you
Oh, okay.
kind of you can give people authorization to build, or they can just look at your stuff
Cool.
so that they can't ruin things.
Is the multiplayer local and online, or
Yep,
just one or the other?
it has local options as well as online. I don't think they have a couch co-op where you could be playing on the same system,
Okay.
but like a local system link.
Right. I'm not sure how that would work, especially if other people. I guess split screen, but then that would take up a lot of screen real estate.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff going on. I wouldn't really want to share a screen on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find myself flipping back and forth between the like third person view and first person.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes you need to be able to see like that exact spot right in front of you.
Yeah,
Whereas
especially if you're going in like a cave or something.
whereas a lot of times the third person is great to like move around the overworld, like boss fights.
Right.
There's even like I want to say unique monsters
Okay.
that you come across the first time you take them down. Like they're pretty beefy and pretty hard to get through, but when you get through them, you get a new recipe,
Okay.
and it's usually something unique. And it's talking to a few other people who've played it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Like they got
So it's a
something
little
different.
bit of an RNG for the drops.
Yeah, and it's really cool. Like
That's neat.
I got this really sweet turtle armor,
Mm-hmm.
which looks amazing. And it made the whole like section that I was doing incredibly easy.
Awesome.
I took like so little damage. But yeah, Dragon Quest Builders 2, it's really, really damn good. No regrets on that being something I'm enjoying the hell out of this year.
Good to hear.
JC, what were you playing this week?
I've been playing two games this week.
Ooh.
I've been playing Blazing Chrome, which is a new run and gun action game for. I got it on GOG, but it's available on some other platforms as well.
Yeah, I
like,
saw that on the Switch.
Yeah, Switch, PS4, and Steam as well. And it's pretty fun. If you really like run and gun games with a bit of a difficulty on it, then I would highly suggest this game. If you're not good at run and gun games, then maybe steer away from it. The game's levels are, it's a one-hit kill system like most of run and gun games.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And just like Contra, and it's heavily influenced by Super Contra, Contra 3: The Alien Wars, and Contra Hardcore. Those are the three main games that I would say it's influenced by. Even maybe a little bit of the original Contra 2, because there's like one level where you're going through a tunnel basically on a jetpack.
Okay.
And the game is very like action movie, like high action and stakes and stuff like that, where like it's got some really cool scenes in it and levels. But yeah, you're going through a tunnel and there's these alien robots that are coming in towards you, and you've got to shoot them before they shoot you. And then sometimes there's lasers in the way that you've got to dodge, and different platforms, kind of like Star Fox, and you're going like left and right or in a corner to avoid it.
Okay.
Kind of reminded me of the level in Super Return of the Jedi for the Super Nintendo, where you're escaping with the Millennium Falcon out of the Death Star. Did you not get that far in that game?
I don't think I ever played. I didn't have a Super Nintendo.
Oh, okay. My friend had the Star Wars games, and we played through all of the Super Star Wars games. But yeah, it plays like that game where it's like first person mode, and you've got your sprite, and it's kind of using Mode 7 style graphics and stuff like that in that level. And then there's some levels that are very reminiscent of. One of the levels is very similar to level 2 in Alien Wars, where you're climbing on stuff and there's like these bug flying things coming over towards you, and there's bad guys coming from the left and right and stuff like that. And then there's a machine that like there's sub bosses in this, and they're pretty difficult. You can make them more difficult if you want. I think the harder difficulty, I haven't unlocked it yet because I haven't beaten the game yet. But the easier difficulty, all it does is it gives you more lives
Wow.
and
Okay.
more item packs basically. And then I'm assuming on the harder difficulty, it's just the normal amount of lives and the normal amount of item packs, but less lives. But yeah, and then there's even one really cool level. Like every running gun or beat 'em up level has like an elevator level. This doesn't. It has an elevator level, and then many of the old like late '80s and early '90s games have like either a surfing level or a motorbike level or like something that you're like on some sort of vehicle moving over, and there's a hover bike level.
Okay.
And it was really, really cool because there's this one scene where you're fighting the bad guy, and then it transitions to on a train, and you like jump up, and then you jump off of the motorbike, and it crashes into some bad guys and explodes them all. And then you land on the train, and then you just lock and load your gun, and you keep on running and gunning. It's pretty cool. It has some really cool action moments like that throughout the game.
Now I have seen like what this looks like. Did you play as the giant robot with the mohawk?
No, I
That is
played.
disappointing. Every time there's a giant robot with a mohawk,
Yeah,
you gotta.
he's a larger hitbox.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes sense.
I did play as him, but he's a larger hitbox. I think his weapon does more damage though. But so I played as the female character. There's 2 characters to start off with, and there's 4 characters in total that I'm aware of anyway.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So I'm
So
pretty
unlockable
sure,
characters.
yeah, I'm pretty sure you might unlock them. I'm guessing whenever you beat it. I haven't been able to beat one of the levels yet before it gets into the last 2 levels. Because there's 4 zones that you can select. You can select them in any order, and yeah, and each zone has its own theme. And then whenever you finish those 4 zones, I'm assuming it's like the last 2 levels of the game.
Is there a water level so far?
No, there's a sand level, broken city, like a post-apocalyptic city level, the jetpack level, and then the
hover bike?
hover bike / train level.
So your water level's coming up.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. So yeah, it's a pretty fun game. If you're a big fan of running gun games and you like a little bit of difficulty, I would highly recommend this game for you. Otherwise, I would say steer away.
And what was the other game you were playing?
So the other game that I've been playing is what I've been playing over the weekend. XCOM's original remake of the game was on sale with its expansion pack, Enemy Within, over the weekend as a part of a 2K game sale on GOG. So it was $17 normally, just under 70.
That's not bad.
Yeah, the deal seemed okay. So I picked that up on Friday and I played it after hanging out with some friends and stuff like that. And so yeah, the game seems okay. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I'm kind of on the side of not necessarily liking it. But here are the good aspects of it before I get into that. So I've played about 12 hours of the game now. I played 3 runs of the game because of wanting to start over, basically. And I know that the game has a mechanic where if you save scum, it will basically make it harder for you automatically. So I just turned on Iron Man mode because of that, so it prevents me from even wanting to try and save scum.
Yeah, I think I just turned on Iron Man my first playthrough.
Yeah, and I'm not novice whenever it comes to like strategy action with minor RPG elements in them, so I figured it shouldn't be that difficult and have it on normal difficulty. So I'm like, okay, I should be able to play through it. And I was also told uh, don't. What's the word I'm looking for?
You don't want to get attached to your
Yeah,
characters.
don't get attached to your characters.
See, I made that mistake. I made prettied them up. I named them.
I changed their colors so that I could tell which one is which. Just so like the sniper was red and like my support character was blue and stuff like that. So I did that so that I could tell like which character was which without even without having to read it. Yeah, so I really like the graphics are neat. They're not the greatest. I have everything turned up as high as they can go, and they look really nice. They're nice art style, and they kind of still fit. Because the game's almost 10 years old. It's like
Yeah,
8 years
it's
old or something like that, and it still kind of holds up. But its main gameplay mechanic is its tactics basically. And I really like how they set all that up because you have two actions basically, but sometimes you don't get your second action depending on what you do. You can't use certain weapons if you've moved. You can do a move and an action, or you can do an action basically. And you can enhance your character so that you can do like an action and then move eventually. And leveling up your people is really, really important. But the problem that I have with the game is that it's basically, in my opinion, designed against the player. And my evidence to that is
yeah.
basically that the RNG is in the computer's favor.
Yes.
The like you have 70-80% and you're missing 90% of the time. If you turn on Overwatch, which is an ability that you basically move and you can turn on Overwatch, what it'll do is basically be a guard ready in action. And then if somebody runs in your line of sight, then you will shoot at the first person that runs in your line of sight. And you get a defense bonus, sure, whenever you're running or moving.
Plus, it's based on like they could be at the farthest of your range.
Yeah, it's based on distance too. But most of the time, it doesn't hit anything.
It's
Uh,
yeah.
I've had circumstances where like everyone fired on the one guy, one of them killed them, and then everybody else missed. It just seems like a whiffing game. It's kind of like playing a first level character in second edition Dungeons and Dragons with the THACO system, where you just can't hit anything. It's very non player
Well,
focused.
that's the meme with XCOM is you could be
Yeah.
standing right next to somebody with 100% chance that you're gonna hit and still miss.
I haven't had that happen. I probably would have uninstalled it if that happened. I have had 83% miss though.
Yeah.
Which is still technically possible.
And
But
17% chance that it doesn't hit.
yep, yep. It's
And it's like
basically
a
a one.
100% chance that that 17% chance is gonna happen.
Yeah. The other main issue that I've had with the game is that it seems to expect that you already understand what is going to happen. And I don't mean in the sense that you understand how to play a strategy tactical game, just in the sense that you understand how each of the monsters work or how the different level setups um, work. Because I've started over 3 times.
Yeah.
The longest gameplay that I've had is my current one, which I'm basically broke and all my characters died 2 missions ago. So I'm gonna have to start over again if I'm gonna continue playing it.
That sounds like a typical XCOM playthrough.
Yeah. Which gets into a different point, but before I get into that one, so the first time I played the game, I didn't know what type of monsters are in this game, and it didn't really teach you what type of monsters are in it. And I basically, once I met something past the normal type of monsters, I basically died as soon as the Slendermen came up because their movement is abnormally weird and they can jump really high, they can move into certain like areas, they can basically run. And what's really frustrating on top of that is because they have these type of movement patterns, they only have one weapon, and the weapon is basically a range of long range. It has our assault rifle power, and it can also take out walls like a missile weapon, like your heavy units. That one weapon can do all three of those things. So you basically are facing a multi-layered unit whenever you're facing them.
Yeah.
And If you like XCOM and you're disagreeing with me right now, you're probably disagreeing with me because of this. You've played XCOM, and the first time you played this game, I highly doubt, unless you've played the previous XCOM games, which are harder, which the testament to that being true is there's a classic mode I can turn on, which tells me that that version is harder. So you have experience basically playing the game. The second time I played through, I didn't lose any people until I actually met um, until I met a certain type of mission where I had to rescue a whole bunch of people, and then I lost all my people there because I had them in certain positions and they just ported into different areas. And I'm like, okay, fine, this is a different type of thing it'll throw at me. I'll start all the way over at the very beginning because I'm playing Iron Man mode. And then the next time was their heavy units. I can't kill them unless I'm point blank range with 80% hit, and then I might do 1 or 2 damage against them, and some of them will do 4 damage against them. And then so I lost a bunch of people on that mission, and then the following mission that I got was the mission where you had to basically find an infiltration in Nova Scotia, and then there's this whale that these zombie maker aliens were coming out of. So I had to go to a beacon point in order to set the beacon point and then run away. And I basically lost every single character in that mission except for my best character and like one of my top 5 characters. And then the next mission was the one with the heavy brutes, and then they basically killed everybody because everybody else in my party was dead. So I'm sure if I start over again, I'll have just as easy of a time playing the game as I had in my first replay with the first few levels, because I now understand how those monsters work, and just throwing things at you with unfair, unbalanced statistic mechanics against you, that if you don't know what's coming up, you won't know how to deal with it. It's kind of like a player playing Sudden Strike and not understanding what a heavy armor unit is, but at least there's only one heavy armor unit the first time you see it instead of 3 or 6 of them. And then you can lose most of your guys succeeding against the mission, and then the next mission will have 4 sets of one heavy armor unit with a bunch of backup, and then that mission will be really hard, but you learned in the mission before how to deal with a heavy armor unit instead of them just throwing, hey, here's 3 heavy units with 3 lanky men, and then 3 floaters, and here's 3 more floaters. I really hope that you have 18 guys to survive all this. And it's like, no, I don't. But if I restarted that mission from scratch without getting the stats probability against my favor in abundance, I'll have a lot easier time doing it. But I'll end by saying this. I don't play games to constantly replay them. I play games to either enjoy them and beat them, and I really only go back to games if I think they're the upper echelon of games, and I feel like they deserve a playthrough. There's a lot of games out there that are really enjoyable, and I'll never play them again, and I think most people are like that, and this is tiered to people who won't necessarily like to want to play through it. I was looking for a game that was difficult because I'm enjoying the difficulty aspect of it, but I'm not enjoying the statistical anomaly difficulty aspect of it. And the fact that it uses that and, hey, you've never seen these mechanics before against you constantly. And there's only like 1 or 2 missions of just like, yeah, go collect some alien goods and kill everybody on the screen. Yay, that was like the first mission that you ever did. It's not the main story missions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that in collection together, I'm kind of annoyed by the game. Mainly because, yeah, sure, get good, but mainly for the aspect of the situation of like, now that I've seen it, and if I were to redo it, it's going to be very easy for me to do. I've proven that 3 times. And I'm not doing that for a 25-hour game to make it a 90-hour game. I'm just not going to do it. It's effectively a waste of my time. So I'll continue playing it maybe a little bit more, and I'll see if I can recoup my team.
Now you're playing with the expansion, right?
Yeah, I'm playing with the expansion.
See, that could be part of the issue, because I know for me, I've been playing through, and I don't want to spend all day talking about this, but I haven't had as many issues. Like I've had some some RNG issues.
Yeah, I
With it,
knew
and
that
that's
was an
just
issue going in.
yeah, exactly. But I haven't.
And I think the expansion pack, as a last point, as you're alluding to, is part of the problem too, because I don't have experience with OG XCOM. So because I don't, with all the extra added
Yeah,
units and or the notes on the expansion pack that I understand is there's more actual like items and stuff like that and things that you can do. So with all that added stuff in there, it's stuff that is throwing even more stuff at me that
it's
is
extra
surprising
bloat
me.
when you don't know the base.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I think it's bad game design. Like I don't know. That's my opinion on it. Yeah. So XCOM Enemy Within kind of a dud, but I have a friend who really likes it and has beaten it 3 times. Some people like it, some people don't. Yeah, so with all that aside, let's get into our main segment of the show and let's talk about some RPGs.
Let's talk about some RPGs.
Yep. So to begin, we're going to talk about our first experiences with RPGs and kind of like the first game and insights on our first experience with the genre.
Now I know we've heard your story a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
why don't you give us a bit of a refresher?
So the first role-playing game that I played was Final Fantasy One for the Nintendo. I got it for my birthday, and my mom got a suggestion from the store clerk because I still had a Nintendo and the Game Gear, and I didn't have a Super Nintendo or a Genesis at the time, and she was asking the clerk, like, my son has a Nintendo. Is there any games? He's about like 10. Like, what should I get him? And I ended up getting Final Fantasy. And so this was a pretty big deal because it was like the first game that I really played that had like a huge backstory. And thinking that it's huge looking back on it is kind of funny and sad at the
Yeah.
same time. But yeah, it had a lot of text in comparison to most
Yep.
games that I've been playing. And it had a lot more depth in the game and a lot more substance in it as well because you had the classes, you had the different characters and things like that. And so I got the game for my birthday and I was playing it, and my best friend at the time actually ended up getting it shortly after because he asked for it. And his birthday's like later in the year, or my birthday's earlier in the year. And I don't remember if he got it for his birthday or that summer or something like that. But we were both kind of playing the game at the same time. Either of us hadn't really beaten it yet. And it was kind of fun because we sort of had a rivalry going on where this was like grade 5 was during the big part of the rivalry, like this
Okay.
early part of that. So we basically, because we got the game like grade 4, and then he got it, and we had this big rivalry, and so we were trying to figure out who could beat it first. And that was, I have fond memories of that because like we argue with each other. We're like, no, I'm better at the game, you're better at the game, like whatever. And we each had our own like areas where we would level up and stuff like that. And our own, we'd start all over with the new party. Maybe this will be better or something like that. And so just like concentrating on beating the game that takes like 18 hours to beat, or maybe 12. Like it doesn't take that long to beat. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I ended up beating it first. I was at my grandparents for the summer, and I ended up beating it. And I remember calling them long distance because they live in Quebec and live in Ontario. But yeah, and it was like, I beat it. And whenever I came back, I like re-showed and like how to beat the last part and stuff like that because it was like kind of mazy and complicated how to figure out where to go and stuff like that because there was certain like dead ends and stuff in the last place that you could go to and stuff. And yeah, I had really fond memories of playing Final Fantasy, and for the longest time I would constantly rebeat the game every couple of years and go back to it and try it with different parties. And even in college, as I mentioned before, finishing off, I got the Game Boy Advanced version, and it was really cool because it was all upgraded with like the WonderSwan style graphics, and it looked really great because it was like 16-bit era graphics, and it was portable. And
Yep.
I was going to college at the time, and I just like I probably beat the game once a week, just like playing through it and switching to different parties. And that's whenever like I really attempted like hard things of the game, like trying to beat the game with like 4 white mages and stuff like that, and just trying to beat the game with like really weird party makeups and stuff like that. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun, and it's probably the longest running game that like I've gone back to just because of the nostalgia for it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like my experience with the first RPG that I've ever played. Yeah. Yeah. What about your first experiences with RPGs, Ian?
So I don't know if I mentioned before. I may have,
Mm-hmm.
but when I was younger, I'd rented Shining Force
Right.
2 a couple of times, and I played it, but not really understanding what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was totally different from anything else that I'd ever played.
Right.
I didn't really make a ton of progress. Yeah, the whole like tactical thing. I mean, granted, I've gone back since
Yep.
and really, really appreciate it. But
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of my first, like, oh, this is weird. But I mean, I gotta give it to Final Fantasy VII
Right.
because that was the first time I actually played through an RPG.
Yeah.
And I really kind of like it was like, oh,
The big first RPG that captivated you.
yeah, like it had this big story and these really interesting environments. Like I found
Right.
myself exploring and just like looking around the various environments instead
Mhm.
of like just I mean now when I play it I'll just go, okay, I have to go to these places. But like
Right.
you'll go into each building, you'll talk to everybody.
Yeah.
You'll click on every surface just to see if maybe there's something there.
Yeah,
Is there something in this drawer?
That's
Nope.
the big thing that I miss about playing certain RPGs for the first time is that innocence that you had.
Yeah, you never get that back.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was like Final Fantasy VII would have been the first time, and that's what really hooked me on RPGs in general. From that point on, I that was the genre that I liked. That's what I wanted to play. I could really get into these stories. They were big, and yeah, I took that with me everywhere.
Cool.
If we were traveling, I would pack up my PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
It was going with me regardless.
Yep.
So it was really the catalyst for me playing any other RPG that I've played up until this point. As much as I appreciate Shining Force,
Mm-hmm.
2. Though I have played a lot of 1. 1's really great as well.
Yeah.
Um,
2's just a really big upgrade from 1. So, I mean, yeah.
yeah, and it has a turtle.
Mm-hmm.
But no, yes, Final Fantasy VII was mine. I know it's really late in the grand scheme of things, but
Well, a lot of people in the 80s and early 90s, up until the PlayStation era, were playing only like platformers and action games.
yeah, like that's it. I'd only really had experience with things like Mario
Mhm.
and Mega Man, which I was horrible at.
Yeah.
But that was it for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know anybody who had a great computer,
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't really get to see any of the early like D&D stuff.
Right.
That was sort of it, and especially having a Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
We did a whole episode on this. The Genesis is completely underappreciated for the great RPGs that it did have.
Yeah.
But they were much fewer,
Yeah.
and they were
most
way
of
less
them-
known.
Yeah, and most of them were action RPGs.
Yes.
Whereas people, whenever in this era, whenever they were thinking of RPGs, they were thinking of what I'll call the traditional RPGs that you would see like by Square or Enix on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, when I played Beyond Oasis, I wasn't thinking like, "Oh, this is an RPG." I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this is an action game."
Yeah, it's an action platformer with some RPG elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, so for me, it's kind of a mix, but
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of my first experience with RPGs. So let's kind of get into the meat of things here, get down to business on RPGs. We had a little bit of an interesting conversation as we were starting up about RPGs in North America kind of over time.
Yeah.
And just the evolution of how things have gone, and how they could have been very different.
Yeah, for sure.
but a lot of things that I didn't really consider,
Hmm.
because I mean, again, I had mentioned that Final Fantasy VII was one of my first exposures to it,
Yep.
and you had mentioned that Grandia or Grandia is arguably like one of the best for the generation,
Hmm.
and it was more so a matter of it didn't have the marketing. It came out much later in North America as opposed to Final Fantasy VII, which came out earlier.
Yeah. So for that example specifically, uh, no one's debating that Final Fantasy isn't a great RPG. It's definitely a great RPG. But what's interesting is that so in Japan, Grandia is actually a really well sought after role playing game,
Hmm.
and it was originally released on the Sega Saturn, which was the top system in Japan versus North America, which was the PlayStation at the time.
Yes.
And so it's kind of was a victim of circumstance because didn't actually get it until much later. And I know that Working Designs kind of looked at maybe creating a uh, translation for it, and they just didn't end up doing it. They kind of concentrated on Lunar a little bit instead, and their plans were to do that on the Saturn. But then with Grandia, once the Saturn had died, and a couple years later, it was released on the PlayStation 1, and it graphically wasn't as better. Like the Saturn, for example, had some shadowing that was like programmed in, for example. It wasn't real shadowing, but it was like a trick basically, and they didn't do that on the PlayStation. And it had a really, really great storyline and a really good fan base. And here it's more of a cult classic than a game that really has a large fan base.
Yeah, it's a lot more niche over here.
Yeah, and I attribute that to basically because of the trends in the marketing of how certain consoles were marketed and trended here and even in Europe, for example, than they did in Japan, where these two role playing games came from. And yeah, like Grandia 2 is known as like the best Grandia in the series, which had the exact same thing happen to it as well because it was on the Dreamcast. And we didn't get Grandia 2 on the PlayStation 2 until after the Dreamcast had failed and a couple of years later, but then it arguably was kind of being matched against Final Fantasy X because they sort of came out around like the same time.
And it didn't have the, I guess, the pedigree
Yeah,
of Final Fantasy,
exactly.
which already had a developed fan base over here.
Exactly.
Whereas this has only had one other game released over here that didn't quite get the
Yep. And they were being released on consoles that just people weren't buying in North America in mass
exactly.
numbers, like the PlayStation and the PlayStation 2. So, really, your market was limited because back in the past, a lot of games were only on one console. It's not as much as today, where many of the games are still only on one console, but like outside of first party games, but there's a lot less of them, and you do get it that you can have it on the anywhere from the computer to any of the consoles, and that just wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah.
So you kind of have like two really large misses where they basically didn't become as popular. And if people were to like, there's a like if I were to suggest a Grandia game for people to play, it would be Grandia 2. And there's a special edition that has been released on like Steam and GOG and I believe the PlayStation 4. And it's they remastered it basically. And it's a really great port and it's really well done. It has voice acting in it. It has really great graphics, a really great storyline, a really JRPG storyline. It's not going to be like your North American RPG like Witcher or Elder Scrolls storyline. It's going to be very Japanese influenced. And if you like that type of thing, it's definitely, and you've never played the game, it's definitely a really good game to look into because Game Arts has done fantastic games.
Yeah.
And they in North America they're not as well known as they were during the time of them making most of their games from the mid 90s to like the late 2000s. That they do over here just because of that victim circumstance thing.
Because that's sort of similar to like the Dragon Quest series, where even though like there's a ton of games
Yeah.
out there and available, it's never been something that really kind of like, so I guess, popped off over here until the last few years. But I
Yeah.
mean, even still, they don't like they still have certain goals
Mm-hmm.
that they're trying to reach in North America
Yep.
to continue releasing these games.
Yeah, and I attribute that to very similar stuff because in the culture of buying consoles and keeping them in North America is a lot different than in Japan, I find. For example, the Dragon Warrior Quest games,
Yeah.
they were originally released on the Nintendo, the first four of them, and the first one was released in like '88 or '89, and the Super Nintendo was already out by the time like two and three were here. So our culture basically it's like, no, it's old, we're not going to get it,
Yeah.
right? Unless you're a really big fan, or a person who just like myself, who just happens to like keep all your old consoles and continue to play old games and get new old games and stuff like that. Like a lot of people I grew up with were like, no, I got rid of all my old stuff and now I have the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, or I have an N64 now and I got rid of my PlayStation. And
Well, I mean, I know for me, like I didn't have a ton of money as a kid, so I mean, if
exactly,
I wanted the next system, I had to get rid of all my old stuff,
exactly,
and
yeah.
that was just how it went for a lot of years.
And so in Japan, like Dragon Quest even had a big marketing push where it didn't necessarily have one here. There was one in the Nintendo Power magazine to try and get some of North America to uh, get involved with the first one, and like there was a lot of copies like sold at a really reduced rate and stuff like that, if I recall correctly, in North America. But like they had a strategy guide that kind of like coincided with the release of it that had a lot of detailed information that wasn't really readily accessible in North America, except for like the game players Nintendo players guide
Yeah, because
thing.
I mean, that was way before the internet
Yeah,
was a thing.
and not everybody had the subscription to Nintendo Power to get that. And really, if you would only really be getting that type of stuff if you were following along with it. And
Yeah.
if you weren't following along with it, it was because you weren't a fan of RPGs. And why would you have been a fan of RPGs if they weren't marketing it? So it's kind of like this negative hole of progression, basically, with role playing games. Because, like I mentioned, action and platforming games were the and sports games were the big thing in North America because that's what sold here.
It was easy to
It
market.
was easy to market because we really like our action and sports games, basically.
Well, and it was easy to take existing properties and just chuck them into a platforming game, have them jump around, have them do some stuff, and bam, there you go. There's $60 from these kids' parents.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, because a lot of these games were released after a new console had come out, people just didn't really care. So the marketing for 3 and 4 was very limited. The fourth Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest game came out in 1992 of October, whenever the Super Nintendo had come out, well, like over a year before. People just didn't necessarily care about the Nintendo at that point. They had either had gotten rid of it, or they wanted the new like Zelda or Mario or Metroid game. Like
Yeah.
they were looking forward to 16-bit era rather than the old games, because that was a lot of our marketing. It was, the usher in the new generation of 16-bit. It was a
Well,
huge push.
because that's the I want to say kind of North American mindset is that it's always got to be that upgrading,
Yeah.
bigger, better, newer.
Hmm.
We don't really live in the past. I mean, we do now a little bit more
Yeah,
because
and some of us do, like we evidently do,
mhm.
but like and I'm sure a lot of you guys do as well, where you'll go back and play old games. But we're talking about a large group of gamers here, especially during this era, that just weren't necessarily playing it. Yeah, and the last thing I'd like to say about role playing games over time is kind of like how RPGs iterate. And the greatest example of this is Square. And I think this is why they're the most successful here, is because there's a lot of games that have come out for other consoles that just weren't necessarily as popular here, which kind of goes into what we were just saying.
Yep.
Ease is another example of this. Lunar is a good example of this.
Yeah.
And they did things first. Ease is a great example because they did cutscenes, for example. But nobody had a TurboGrafx 16 over here. Not nobody,
No.
but a lot of people didn't.
Well, only rich people because the TurboGrafx 16 over here was super expensive initially.
Yeah, it was fairly expensive. And, people didn't necessarily have money to buy all four consoles. So it's just, yeah. And so role playing games and games in general, but role playing games are great because they iterate over themselves, and they'll take aspects of, that company did something really good over there, and that company did something really good over there, and then something like a really popular game comes out over here by Square, and it does very, very well. And that's the reason why. But a lot of us haven't played all those other games to understand where the background of that is, because it kind of goes back and forth between like Ultima did this and Wizardry did that and Might and Magic did this, and then Japan was influenced and did a whole bunch of different graphical things, and then North America was influenced and did some other stuff, and then Japan was influenced, and
It's been a really
iteration.
good back and forth.
Exactly.
But the thing is, we don't necessarily see that progression, especially
Especially
at the
early.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you're not, as a kid, I'm not like, oh, I want to play Ys.
Yeah, you don't know what it is necessarily.
I mean, I didn't have a TurboGrafx, but
Yeah.
I mean, also like Lunar.
Mhm.
I didn't play Lunar until I played Lunar because I had a Sega CD, but very few people did,
Mhm.
and it would have been totally missed.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and Lunar was another like great early example of just the Red Book audio and stuff like that, and the cutscenes and the voice acting, and a great JRPG story and stuff like that. And it did a lot of firsts, so to speak, that were done a year or two later by really popular gaming companies. But yeah, it's kind of just a little bit of perspective on some of the early RPGs in North America over time, and kind of how it evolved and stuff like that. And you get, this isn't as prominent of a thing now, I would say, because we're getting a lot more of those games that weren't necessarily released here, that weren't released here like in the 90s and in the 80s.
yeah, you're
And
starting to see everything get released over here.
yeah,
You
or
don't have staggered release dates.
yeah, and it's a lot closer. You don't have the Grandia issue where it comes out 2 or 3 years later, and
Yeah.
you have more accessibility to understanding. Like if you don't subscribe to the niche magazines, you know that there's like a Rondo of Blood or whatever, and
Yeah.
and you have the internet and all the YouTube and everything else, and online stores that have like English language in patch and stuff like that, because they know that they will sell to niche audience and stuff like that, but you have to import it in from Asia
Yep.
and everything. And yeah, it's really cool because before you didn't have that, and now you do, and you can play all these like niche RPGs and stuff.
Well, and
So
even beyond that, you have like we have all this access to reviews and that, and you've got
yeah.
these great review like aggregate sites like Metacritic.
Yep.
So even if you didn't know necessarily that there was a new Ys game, I keep going back to that just because I like to say it. But I mean, was it Lacrimosa of Dana came out last year?
Yep.
And it did really well,
Mm-hmm.
and like incredibly well.
Yeah.
Maybe not sales wise, but it was reviewed very well.
Yeah, it reviewed well and it sold its numbers. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, and also with online digital media, which we've talked about on the channel before, this is becoming even easier for these companies to bring stuff over here because they don't have that overhead cost of, well, if it doesn't sell, then we have a huge
there's less
loss in
of
capital
that,
because of all the different shipping and marketing and publishing and stuff like that, which you don't have as in the same way anymore.
yeah, and there's no scarcity to it. It's not like,
Exactly.
oh, we just sold the last copy.
Yeah.
All right, I'll go download it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep. It's just a thing you do now. So let's talk about our thoughts on different genres and styles of RPGs. Let's start off with some of the style of RPGs, because you have a lot of different styles of RPGs, like action, tactical, and turn-based, which are kind of like the three main ones. There's hundreds of them that we could go into.
and
But
combinations of all of them, and
yeah, and that's the great thing I love about RPGs, is that you can get like your turn-based action one or tactical turn-based or whatever, right? Like everything has different labels for it and stuff like that. But I really like action RPGs, and I think a reason why I like them is because growing up with the Sega Genesis, there are so many
yeah.
great examples of Sega Genesis like action RPGs, like Light Crusader is a good example
Yep.
of that, and you had like Landstalker and things like that too, and it was just neat because we had the run and gun games and the platforming and action games, which are just live action games, and it took that aspect of what a lot of people enjoyed and then threw all those RPG mechanics in them and RPG stories that we know and attribute to being like RPG, like main mechanics, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just really cool genre, and I feel like a lot of uh, Super Nintendo players kind of didn't necessarily, in respects to RPGs, didn't necessarily like play as many of them. Unfortunately,
No, I mean you had like Secret of Mana
you did, yeah. But then even
or
that was,
Mana.
but you did. But I don't think that game was as well known until later.
No, I don't think it was. It wasn't huge
Hmm.
because we only got the one. I mean, there was
Yeah.
3 of them,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
yeah, we just got that,
Yep.
which is technically the second one.
Yes.
So I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I for me, yes, I played Beyond Oasis. I
Hmm.
didn't really play too many of the action RPGs
Hmm.
on the Genesis. It wasn't until I got a PC
Right.
and really got into like Diablo, like
Yeah.
the original Diablo. That was
Yeah, that's like a lot of people's like pinnacle like action RPG that they played was Diablo, because it was just like lifetime constant action and go 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 go
But
and
then you also had that like you leveled up, so now I got to redistribute my stat
yep.
points. I need, to have this many, like this much intelligence
Hmm.
if I want to be able to cast these spells. Like you
Yeah.
could multi-class.
Yeah, I think over time the action RPG has become one of the more successful role playing games out there, at least in North America, in
Oh,
my opinion,
absolutely.
just because it like as more hybrid genres have come out, the action element is kind of one of them that has constantly always stuck with people, and it's kind of like set its core in a lot of the different games that are role playing game in one aspect or
Well,
another.
and I think it's slightly more accessible to I guess the North American audience because
Yeah,
it's like you said, it's that instant like
gratification.
yeah,
Hmm.
I pull the trigger, I swing my sword.
Yeah, you don't have to think about it as much as you do in tactical RPGs. And though I love myself a grid based like tactical RPG, I would say it wasn't until like the PlayStation era or like late Super Nintendo that like a lot of really good ones were coming out. Because like your early examples are the Shining Force series, the Ogre Battle series.
Which I mean, I love Shining Force. I
Yep.
did. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I at the time I didn't understand it like I do now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I didn't appreciate it.
Yeah, and I guess older generations would think like of Ultima, because Ultima 4 and 3 have a grid uh, based battle as well. But yeah, and it was just kind of cool because like now you see these types of games all the time, because like, you have Banner Saga, for example.
Yeah, that
Hmm.
and like you can play Banner Saga on anything.
Yeah, and like it's kind of casual and it's kind of not, because it has that aspect of like, okay, I'll do a mission and then on my phone while like I'm on the bus or whatever, and then or while I'm like waiting for like a friend to come over or something, and then save and then play it later and stuff like that. And
It has that casual aspect to it, but it also has like it's got permadeath.
mm-hmm.
If you make a mistake,
Yep.
if you push someone to fight when they're already injured
Yeah.
and they go down again, they're dead.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, it's like it is that casual like, yeah, I'm just kind of playing this on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have that like terror of something like Fire Emblem
Mm-hmm.
where you make a mistake and that character's gone and they're
Yeah.
gone.
They're not coming back.
Yeah. You're like, well, that's all
Try
right.
again. Yeah.
To reload a save.
Yeah, start over from the beginning. And yeah, and the last style of RPG that we wanted to talk about a little
Kind of the
bit.
more traditional,
Yeah.
what you would consider
Kind of
would
like
be
the Final Fantasy type or the Fantasy Star type is your.
original Final Fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's definitely not turn based anymore.
No, straight to action.
But yeah, is our turn-based mechanics where you go, then I go in initiative order, and it's kind of comes with its core roots from Dungeons and Dragons, where there's an initiative order, and then everybody like rolls for initiative and
Yep.
sets it up. The game does all that for you, and then you can stop, wait, and decide, oh, okay, this is this type of monster, and I can really think about what it is that I want to do. And you're probably not thinking about it that slowly, but then, whenever you're really tense in a boss battle, maybe you are, or something like that,
Well,
right?
what's interesting is you can see kind of as we went through the like late 90s and to the 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
we even started getting away from it within it,
Yes.
because you have the like active time.
Yeah, where it was still turn-based, but in a sense of real time, which
Yeah,
I really like that era because, as I mentioned, I really like action RPGs. I also really like turn-based RPGs, but the hybrid in between is kind of its sweet spot for me. Because like whenever I play any of the Infinity Engine games, I get it to pause at the end of every single round, but it's still more real time-ish. It's not as real time as Diablo,
yeah,
but I at least can like go through and like there's a lot of spells in my. I usually play with like 4 to 6 different wizards, so my turn is a little bit harder than some people's. But yeah, it's something that is kind of like you said bleeding over into more action oriented style
well,
where
even you could see it in Final Fantasy, because
hmm
in 7 you had the option for real time
yep
or like wait time.
hmm
So I mean, if you were in the like, oh yeah, it was active time,
yep
sorry. But if you're in active
ATB
time, you got to make that decision, otherwise that monster's attacking,
yeah
and you have
yeah because it'll pass your
completely wait.
initiative to the next initiative slot and then the next initiative slot if you just sit there and let it do nothing unless you pause it but yeah
Yeah, it'll just keep going.
yeah which adds a different element of stress to it but it's still turn based in a sense which is kind of
Yeah,
cool
you're still taking your time to make that decision, but
yeah.
not too much of that time.
Yeah, whenever Final Fantasy VII did that, that's whenever I became a really, really big fan of that system, and it became better as it went on, like in 10 and so forth and stuff like that. But yeah, and it's kind of cool because like turn-based RPGs are kind of known as like the classical RPG style because you have Dragon Quest 11 that just came out,
Yep.
and it's very traditional style of RPG. It's
Yeah.
fully turn-based. It has very grindy mechanics and stuff like
Yep.
that, which is an old attribute to RPGs where you'd have to grind in certain areas and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
you need to be a certain level,
mm-hmm,
because this boss is level 30, and if you're level 28, he's going to wreck you.
yep, or it's going to be very, very difficult if you don't know the system that well.
That's why you go to 35 and just breeze through
Yeah, but hopefully that didn't take you 10 hours.
it.
Yeah. But let's go into some different genres. I think the main one that people attribute to role playing games and genres is the fantasy aspect.
Yeah.
It's kind of the core mechanic that is the core label, I should say, that's added to RPG almost every single time. That kind of stems from Dungeons and Dragons originally being a fantasy game. And
Yeah, and
yeah,
Lord of the Rings,
yeah,
and
exactly.
it's kind of what started all of it, right?
Yeah. And there's not too much to say about it, but it's one of my favorite genres, I would say. Although I really really like all the genres. Fantasy I play the most just because I like the magic aspect of it. But then it wasn't until later that I started really appreciating the sci-fi RPGs because they added psionics into it.
Well, see, the sci-fi RPGs were kind of my favorite,
Mm-hmm.
because I liked that aspect of like space travel and
Yeah.
exploration, and playing things like Star Ocean, where yeah, yes, you start on a planet, but okay, I'm gonna go to another planet now.
Mm-hmm.
You have these huge environments.
Yeah. Earlier on, I generally attributed the sci-fi genre to more like adventure style games and to action style games,
Yeah.
basically. And whenever they were like turn-based RPGs, like the Star Ocean one, I did definitely I played the PlayStation the remake of the PlayStation one for the PSP.
Okay.
Uh,
First departure.
yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's what it's called. And yeah, so there's sci-fi, and it's really neat element, especially for people who like things like Star Trek or Star Wars and stuff like that, because it gives them ideas for like their campaigns and stuff. So, I mean, that's how I came up with my material for Star Wars role playing tabletop role playing game.
Hey, it's it's neat being able to change the environment so drastically.
Mm-hmm.
I found with more of the fantasy settings, you're always going to be in a kind of similar area,
Yeah.
because it is very grounded.
Yep.
But with like the Knights of the Old Republic stuff,
Mm-hmm.
where you're going to drastically different planets
Yep.
constantly,
Yeah.
and then you've got time within the ship as well. You have all of these really different environments,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, you find places where you like to spend time.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll go and grind here
Mm-hmm.
because I like this planet. I like fighting these monsters.
Yeah.
They look cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate this planet because, you know, these monsters are small and just numerous.
Mm-hmm.
It's
The hordlings are usually
yeah.
hard to get through. And I guess moving on, one of the I think less used genres is urban setting.
Yeah, like kind
It's
of
like
like current.
yeah, I wonder why that is. There's quite a few examples of urban, and I think there's less examples of their next one. But like
Yeah.
you know, there's just so few urban RPGs, especially early on, because like Earthbound was really the only one that I knew of up until like probably the late 90s.
Yeah, I mean, you had the original Shadowrun
Mm-hmm.
on the Genesis, I believe. I believe the Genesis was actually more of an RPG than the Super Nintendo.
No, they're both RPGs. They're just different style.
Okay, I'm wrong.
Yep.
First time this episode. But yeah, you didn't have very many.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
you started getting a little bit more as you got into the PS1,
And
PS2
era.
era because you had the Persona games.
Yeah, and those games are like being released over here. Because there was a lot of them for the PlayStation that we didn't get until later, right?
Well, yeah, we didn't. I think Persona 2 was the first one we got,
Okay.
and that was PlayStation 1.
Hmm.
And then the huge time period between that and 3.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Mhm.
there's not a lot that you have that are kind of in that setting.
Right.
And I mean, even kind of the Persona games are a little bit different because even though it is an urban setting, it is Japan.
Yep.
Actually, most of the like Shin Megami Tensei games are Japan.
Yep.
So it's
Yeah, they're almost all an urban setting.
it's an urban setting, but it's an unfamiliar urban setting because it's Japan. It's
Yeah.
very different from North America. Whereas at least Earthbound
Mhm.
did feel a little bit more normal.
Yeah.
I
it
mean,
was
as
more
weird
North
as it
Americanized.
gets,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, and as time goes on, though, I would like to say about the urban setting. One thing with the urban setting games that's I'm really thankful for is that we are actually getting more of them over time, unlike before where we had a lot less of them. Is I think specifically attributed to the hybrid genres because we have a lot of action RPGs, kind of like the Yakuza games, which have RPG elements to them. And different like the Shadowrun games and whatnot that have basically more of a like a live action urban setting, and even the
Deus Ex.
Deus Ex and stuff like that. These hybrid genre games are in an urban setting and they have a lot of RPG elements. So this is something that is becoming more and more prominent over time, which I think is which I'm thankful for because I always wondered why, being younger, there wasn't more of them, and like
Mm.
all of them are fantasy. I'm like, well, can't like an RPG be taking place in today? And like, yeah, like I said, my only example at the time was Earthbound until like the Persona games, and I didn't know about the Persona games until PlayStation 2.
I mean, it's arguably we had River City Ransom, but again, it's an action RPG.
Yeah,
It is kind of
that's
a hybrid genre.
that's a beat 'em up game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with RPG elements.
You can buy stuff and stuff. Yeah. Last but certainly not least is post-apocalyptic, and this genre is very, very popular in the first-person shooter genre and in the survival genre and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But with regards to like core RPGs, they're few and far between.
yeah. There's not a whole lot. I mean, you had the original like Wasteland, which
And
kind
then
of evolved into Fallout,
Those guys made Fallout, and then they eventually like came
and
back
then made another Wasteland.
Yep.
But yeah, you don't really see a lot of it. Now, granted, I guess some of the best RPG experiences that I had in my or as time went on was with Fallout. Like that, there
Like
was just
original
so
Fallout, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like Fallout 2
We're
specifically.
talking about Black Isle Fallout, not Fallout New Vegas and 3 and the games that most of the people watching this have probably played.
Though New Vegas is the best of the new ones. Fight me.
I played the originals.
2, there was so much you could do.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to do anything remotely close to your main quest.
Yeah, and you could
But you
parlay
also
a lot of it.
you also had a time limit too. So if you didn't do any of that stuff, you couldn't just like, oh, I'm gonna back burner this for a little while.
Yeah.
It's if you want to get it done, yeah, you can back burner it for a little bit, but you gotta kind of stay on task, or else your whole like village is done.
Yeah, that game, that's one of the reasons why my DM styling exists. Because I give players options where one thing will happen or another thing will happen, and people are generally used to being able to do everything, and I'm like, no, you gotta choose. You can thank Fallout and a couple of other games for that, because, I mean,
It's a great game mechanic,
yeah.
and having that choice,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that your choice is gonna have that consequence,
Yeah.
even like 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I always found it interesting. This isn't a post-apocalyptic RPG. Um, uh, Undertale.
Yep.
You can parlay through the whole entire game and not fight anything. You could do that in Fallout.
Yeah,
And a lot of
if your
people
stats were
don't bring that up whenever they talk about original Fallout, because if you, like you were gonna say, stat your character correctly
Yep.
into charisma and stuff, then there are certain circumstances where you could talk yourself through some certain circumstances and not actually have to fight everybody. It was a really interesting and cool idea. There's different role playing games that came out before that you could do that too, and after and stuff like that. But Fallout was like one of those popular RPGs at the time that this happened.
But it was fun because the dialogue
Mhm.
choices were entertaining.
Yeah,
If
there's so
you
many of
if
them.
your intelligence was in the toilet, your dialogue options would be in the toilet. It was
Yep.
great.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, you didn't really see that as much at the time,
Mm-hmm.
at least within, I guess, semi-popular options.
Yep.
So I mean, it does kind of suck a little bit that the whole post-apocalyptic setting
Yeah.
is very underutilized in RPGs,
Mm-hmm.
but at least in some of the core games that
Where
we've got,
where we've
it was
gotten,
well done.
yeah, and yeah, it was yeah, we're exactly where we've gotten post-apocalyptic. The games have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I guess to finish everything up with our main topics with the segment is kind of what we've kind of been alluding to and talking a little bit about is that as time has gone on, the role playing mechanic, and this is my favorite thing about the genre of role playing games, is now kind of a part of everything.
It
You
really
have
is.
level up mechanics, the purchasing and upgrading of different items and abilities and stuff like that.
You have stat points
Yep.
in sports games,
Yep.
which you can improve and like essentially level up
Yeah.
in sports games. Like that's insane.
Yeah, it's so cool, and the fact that like it's kind of like that and kind of action are kind of like the two like main things that are kind of like almost everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're seeing RPG elements in things that were primarily just shooters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Fallout series.
Yep. Yeah.
Or not Fallout, Far Cry.
Mm-hmm. And
Fallout for that matter,
yeah,
but
the newer
that's
Fallouts. And Mass Effect. Mass Effect's a good example too, because it's
Yeah.
a third person like run and gun game with a ton of RPG mechanics and a huge RPG lore story behind it.
you got
right?
loads of chest high walls that you're gonna crouch behind and shoot over.
Yep.
And then you're gonna upgrade your stats and have huge dialogues with aliens.
Yep.
Maybe bone one. Who knows? Probably.
Probably.
Prob-
BioWare knows what you want.
Yep. Yep. The weird aliens. But no, it's really interesting that we've kind of evolved to that point where something that was really a niche
Mm-hmm.
option is now prevalent in pretty much everything you do.
Yeah.
Almost everything's gonna have stat upgrades,
Mm-hmm.
purchasable items, even like leveling up.
Mm-hmm.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. So let's get into some RPG selections. So first, we made 2 lists of hidden gems and some top suggestions. For hidden gems, I'll start. A game for the PlayStation 1 that I think a lot of people haven't played and really should, and they should make a freaking sequel or a remake or a new game in the same world or something like that. Legend of Dragoon. This game is fantastic. It had such a interesting storyline,
Yep.
really cool, turn-based like interactivity where if you hit the action button at the right time, you would get an extra attacks and stuff like that. So it
Yeah.
kind of added an action element to it.
A little bit like Final Fantasy VIII.
A little bit, yeah. And Uh, I would argue a little bit like Super Mario RPG, because if you
Yeah,
press the button at the right time, then you would hear the distinctive sound effect, and it would have done more damage. But yeah, it's a really interesting game. It starts off with you go back to your town, and basically the village has been burned down. It's been attacked by like the Empire essentially, and one thing leads to another. You basically meet this dragoon. You have a dragoon power in yourself as well, and the dragoon power is essentially you have a dragon power, and you can morph into a dragon, and then you get different abilities, and you have your normal character, your dragoon character, and you can play either or in the battle and switch up to them, and you get more powers and abilities as it goes through. And there's a really large, elaborate storyline that um, grows on from that beginnings essentially, and it takes you through a good 50, 60 hour RPG.
yeah, it's
It's
real
yeah.
big.
Yeah, it's a really really great game. I always wondered why it didn't become a franchise, but I didn't sell that well. But yeah, if you're it's available on PlayStation Classic.
Yep.
If you're interested in getting it,
And it's actually not too hard to find.
it's not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I would say PlayStation Classic's probably the way to go, because it's
A little easier.
little easier. How about yourself, Ian?
I'm gonna say Jade Empire
Mm-hmm.
because it was uh like late in the Xbox life cycle.
Yep.
I think the 360 had already released when that came out,
Okay.
and yeah, it was very much overlooked. It didn't. It was the same mechanics as the Knights of the Old Republic games that had released before,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a totally new IP. It
Right.
was an independent story. It had no ties to anything else other
Yeah.
than like some like like Chinese folklore and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean the system was the same as KOTOR, just
Mm-hmm.
no lightsabers. Like you would kind of spec out like fighting
Mm-hmm.
styles. You could adjust based on um, various like learning from various masters.
Yep.
You'd travel around. The story was great. I'm not gonna go into it too much,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, you're like a nobody who ascends to way more than that.
Right.
And like you had interesting party members. There was a really cool like tattoo system
Mm-hmm.
where you'd um, gain new tattoos
Right.
throughout the game. It was just totally underappreciated. Barely anybody played it. Jade Empire.
Yeah, I think its major problem was is that it was only available on the Xbox originally, and it
It
didn't sell as well as the PlayStation 2, and it wasn't available on the PC right away. So,
no, that was your issue with most of the early BioWare games
mm-hmm.
because they were
For some reason, they decided to do Xbox.
I yeah. I mean,
It wasn't a
to
problem with
that
you.
point, the KOTOR games, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, if you didn't play either of those, play them. They're still good.
Yep.
I mean, visually they don't hold up as well, but
Play
no,
them on the PC and patch them.
yeah, they look like they're dirt cheap on the PC.
Mm-hmm.
Buy it. Anyways, I'll stop yelling. JC, what's another one from you?
So the reason why I wanted a Sega Saturn, Albert Odyssey.
Yeah.
It's the only way you can get it. It's a very obscure RPG. It's a really great RPG. It's kind of similar to any of the Game Art games like Lunar, and it's a turn-based turn-based RPG, and it's not as hard as other RPGs. It's just its story and its dialogue are really well done. It has a North American translation to it, very working design style, so it has some like late 90s pop culture and stuff like that into it,
Ooh,
which some people don't necessarily like, but
I do.
I liked it. So yeah, it's a game that most people should check out. Its story starts off with essentially you are your parents are killed, and the village is burned down essentially, and there's a family heirloom sword, and it protects you, the child. And then one of these winged people find you, and then foster you, and then you grow up many years later, and you're essentially like a tween or a teen, and you go off on an adventure because the world is
The semi-typical JRPG story.
yep. And you meet very interesting characters on the way, and you go on an adventure, and there's this empire that's essentially just trying to overthrow everybody and control everything, just like a lot of JRPGs. But yeah, it's a very atypical role playing game, but it's a very enjoyable one. It's got 2 parts to it, and yeah, it's very distinct, like acts basically, and it's yeah, very enjoyable. Your next one, Ian?
This one's gonna get really weird.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Boktai. It's for the Game Boy Advance.
Okay.
There was 2 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Technically a third because there was a game released on the DS called Lunar Nights,
Okay.
which is within the same story. But I start with Boktai.
Yep.
It was it's made by Hideo Kojima,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted people to go outside.
Right.
So it has a solar sensor on the cartridge,
Cool.
but it was made with the original Game Boy Advance in mind.
Yeah.
So where the cartridge would slot in, the cell would be facing the sun.
Yep.
Whereas being underneath,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting way less sunlight.
Yeah, because it's on the bottom.
I found I had to like hold it up
Mm-hmm.
because it was based around sunlight. You were a vampire hunter, which yeah, you're a young child with a solar gun that you use to fight these ghouls. You go through castles and eventually get to the boss vampire.
Mm-hmm.
You generally have to do that during the day
Right.
because then he's in his coffin.
Mm-hmm.
You would grab the coffin and drag it outside to these like solar like circles,
Okay.
and you would reflect the sunlight in at the coffin
Mm-hmm.
to destroy the vampire.
Cool.
And you would have to do that with solar energy. So you would have to use sunlight. Now you could still play it at night.
Mm-hmm.
There was solar banks
Okay.
throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were in a cave, you couldn't just hold up the solar gun there because there was a button to hold it up,
Oh, okay.
which would allow it to charge if you were in an exterior place.
Right.
But if you're in like a cave or something, you'd have to go to these solar banks
Mm-hmm.
to recharge and get more solar ammo.
Cool.
But yeah, it was super weird. It is definitely more of an action RPG.
Right.
But if you can find a copy of it, it's a lot of fun. You can't really emulate it
Right.
because you do need the sun
Yeah, you would need some sort of like added patch or something to.
to act as a fake sun.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a way, but
Mhm.
yeah, Boktai, it's really interesting.
Cool.
I dig it.
So, those are some hidden gems that we have that we think people should look into. Let's go into some top RPG suggestions. Ian, do you want to take us through your list?
Yeah, I'll run you through my list. It's pretty straightforward. Knowing me, you're gonna know at least one of these titles. If you've watched any of these videos, you will know something on this list.
Fair enough.
So I'll start off with Persona 5.
Mhm.
It was probably one of my favorite RPGs of like recent history.
Mhm.
I think it's almost perfect. That Persona 3 and 4 both had so many great elements, and this took all of the great stuff from all of the previous games and just refined it.
Right.
Your art style is beautiful. The soundtrack's amazing. The gameplay's outstanding. The story's a lot of fun. The characters are rich and well thought out.
Mhm.
It's just a fun world to spend time in.
Yeah, everything in this game has style. It's pretty.
Yeah, even when you finish combat, your like post-combat screen where you see your experience and your money and your items is slick.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing about this game that isn't slick.
Mm-hmm.
It's all so fantastic. If you haven't played Persona 5, do yourself a favor and play it. You can get it for like $20 now.
Yeah.
It's
I would recommend maybe waiting for the Royal Edition, actually.
you know what? If it's your first Persona experience, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
That's
But
true.
that is in typical Persona fashion. They usually do release a second version of the game
Yep.
a few years later with some additional content and usually an extra character you can pick up somewhere along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Persona 5. Next off, the Valkyria Chronicles series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one that I've not played myself, but I've seen my friend play a lot of it.
It's awesome. Um, as far as like a tactical RPG goes,
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy the way that this is laid out.
Mm-hmm.
I like that it's like an action point system,
Right.
that I can run. It's not grid based. I can go in whatever direction I want to go. Yeah, okay, maybe it's a grid that I can't see, but it feels a little bit more actiony.
Mm-hmm.
You can move to where you want to move. Um, Things feel real. Like if I go prone in grass, I won't be seen.
Right.
If you're way up high, you stand out. It's got great cover mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
It has an RNG system of percentages with the targeting that is at least 70% better than
XCOM.
XCOM.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think most of my time I've spent with 4
Mm-hmm.
on the Switch. Again, because the Switch is amazing. But yeah, you have great characters. You have a really interesting setting, like an alternate Europe during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's kind of like between World War One and Two.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, because
It's
like it has World War One style tanks.
it does,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has some it also has some like future tech, but
Yeah.
because Japan. But
I mean, they have Gundams, so
it also, yeah, that's fair. But so Valkyria Chronicles, Diablo 3,
right.
which I mean, I might get some hate. Yes, I think Diablo 2 is probably my favorite of the series,
Okay.
but you can get Diablo 3 on anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure you could play that on a fridge. Yeah, it's well done. The mechanics are very simple.
Yeah.
It is stripped down. You don't have to worry about stat points as much because it just allocates that for you as you level.
Yeah, I would say Diablo 3 is probably the easiest Diablo so far to get into.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of post-game content as well,
Mm-hmm.
like being able to go back and do rifts and the Infernal Machine items. Like, there's a lot of extra stuff to do,
Yep.
and even gaining the prestige points and being able to put those into new characters when you start a new game
Yep.
to make a new game a little bit, I guess, easier to kind
Mm-hmm.
of get a new character up to 60,
Mm-hmm.
where they can then start doing fun stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it's all the loot, a little bit less of the drama than 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a great series, great story, but yeah, a little bit less management.
Cool.
Chrono Cross, which I enjoyed Chrono Trigger, but the story for Chrono Cross, as well as the setting, everything.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the combat system. I thought it was fantastic, being able to slot in different spells
Right.
and abilities that would be different colors. The different colors would adjust the colors on the fields.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were able to get everything blue and then use like a big blue ability,
Mm-hmm.
it would do a ton of extra damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was so much to Chrono Cross, and it's a game that I feel got very much missed. This was actually going to be in my hidden gems,
Oh, okay.
but I was like, I got to give some love to Jade Empire because nobody played Jade Empire. But yeah, Chrono Cross. If you have never played it, I'm pretty sure you can get it on. I mean, I had it on my PS3, and I
Right.
think you might still be able to get it on the PlayStation Network.
Okay.
Probably through it's one of the PlayStation
Yeah, the PlayStation
Classics.
Classics is still around, so.
But it's worth checking out if you enjoy a semi-typical JRPG. Tons of characters with character.
As like it's a Gaiden like number of characters. It has a lot of characters.
It's a ton, and you can easily. I don't think you can get all of them in one playthrough. I don't think that's possible.
Okay.
You've got
I
to
don't
go.
know.
I'm fairly certain that there are some that you would get.
Okay. It's like a choice.
Yeah, you basically have a choice between two.
Fair enough.
So it's a game that you would have to play twice to get like to experience all the characters.
Sure.
But they're all interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's not a lot that are just like, oh, it's Jim. It's like, sweet, we brought Jim and accounting in. But yeah.
Get him to do maths.
Yeah, he does sweet maths. But check it out. It's a lot of fun. And the story shift midway through is probably one of my favorites in recent history.
Awesome.
Lastly, Final Fantasy VIII. Play it. Okay? I get it. The draw system is not good.
It's terrible.
Fine. But the junction system's great.
Yeah, okay. Music's great.
Music's great.
Characters are really good, minus a couple.
No. Characters are great.
You like Zell?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't.
Yes.
I, thought he was
I
a
loved
punk.
Zell.
I thought he was a punk.
Hey, yes. I was a punk. How could I identified with him. I had a good friend who was exactly like him. He loved hot dogs. Do you not like hot dogs?
I like veggie dogs.
See, there you go. You're like 40% Zell. You just need a little bit of shadow boxing and you're there.
Yeah, shadow boxing and play some blitzball. I'll be all good.
So, that's 10. 10.
Oh, yeah. See, I keep on yeah.
Play 8. We're getting an HD remaster soon. Download it. Play it. I will buy it for you. I don't care. Just play it.
I own it. Like, multiple times. I've
Yeah.
played through it.
Play it again. Please. People. 7 gets way too much love.
I'm just...
8.
Yep.
8's the game.
8's a really good game. You want to say anything about 8, though?
I mean, I literally had an episode
All right.
episodes ago where I went on about this for hours, but I have to stay true to form and give people the recommendation to play Final Fantasy VIII. I'm looking at you. You didn't play it. I know you didn't. Play it, please.
You heard him, folks. Final Fantasy VIII.
JC, what's your recommendations?
I put my recommendations in chronological order, so because I'm weird that way.
We like you anyways.
The first game came out in the 80s. Pool of Radiance is a gold box Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game. This game is a really, really good example of a classic RPG. So it's a pretty atypical Forgotten Realms storyline where it's just a bunch of heroes and they gotta basically stop the force that's impending doom on the land. And it's a game where you get to create your own characters and you get to select what they look like.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
For the 80s?
Mhm.
Wow, that's...
Yeah, you could select like what weapon and pants and color and like hat and stuff like that. It was pretty cool. And the game basically takes place in a city called Flan, and you go out and basically do expeditions in the different areas of the city, clearing it out and learning more and more things as you go. There's not too much storyline in this game other than like the main point of what you're supposed to do. But each area has its own kind of aesthetic. There's an undead area, there's a goblin area, and so on.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and so as you clear out all the different areas, you eventually get to an overland map, and you get to do a whole bunch of different, like there's a wizard's tower, for example, that you can do.
So it like opens right up.
Yeah, it opens right up, and then you do a whole bunch of different things outside, and then it comes back to form into the main area after you've leveled up high enough, and you can do the main castle in Flan, and you eventually fight Tyrant Thraxus, and who's the big bad guy, at his Pool of Radiance, and yeah, take him out. It's a pretty cool game. It's not too long, but it does have the issue of you're very weak at the beginning, but once you hit like level 4, level 5, you get a fireball spell, and at level 5, if your wizard survives that long, and yeah, you can once you get up in higher level and you can actually hit something, you're pretty good to go.
Okay.
The second game is one of my favorite JRPGs, and that game is Lunar the Silver Star.
It's really funny because as we were going through this, I put this on my list.
Mm-hmm.
I had it written down, and then I even put it on my list. And I scrolled down. I'm like, oh, what did JC have? And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I'll slide it off mine. But that it's good enough that it was on both of our lists
Yeah.
unintentionally.
Yeah, and I think this is a prime example of kind of role playing games that a lot of people should have played during the time and missed and didn't necessarily play up until the complete editions for the PlayStation.
Well, I mean, it was really only on
It was only on Sega
Sega
CD.
CD. So
Yeah.
if you were one of the like 30 people who had a Sega CD,
Yeah.
you tried this. I mean, I tried it. I
Mhm.
think it was probably one of my first exposures to like anime
Mhm.
because that's all you had a whole bunch of cutscenes that were, your typical like Japanese animation style.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is amazing. I'd
Mhm.
never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, this is the game that really gave me a lot of insight and hope into what the genre would go into the future because of the cutscenes.
Yeah.
I know Yeast did it earlier, but that's a different story.
Nobody had it. There was 5 people that had TurboGrafx 16s,
Even TurboGrafx CD, like
and only one of them had Ys.
yeah. And yeah, it had a little bit of spoken dialogue because of the CD, and
Yep.
not all of it, but yeah, and really great storyline, and it's a really enjoyable game. Look into it if you like classic style RPGs and you've never played it. I highly recommend this game.
Yeah, and I didn't. I know this is a weird point on it, but I remember my playthrough being around the like 30 hour.
Yeah, it's not too long. I would say it's probably 20 to 30 hours if I recall
Yeah,
correctly.
like it's not
Hmm.
it's not an undertaking. Like
Yeah.
it's not like an Elder Scrolls game where you're like, oh, I'm gonna play like 100 hours of this. I don't have
Yeah.
100 hours to play. It's like 20 to 30 hours.
Yeah.
Like that's very reasonable.
Mhm.
That's like 3 shooters.
Yeah.
Play Lunar.
Yeah. So my next suggestion is one of my favorite RPGs, and it's the Infinity Engine RPGs. And I couldn't decide which one to put on here, but I decided ultimately on the Baldur's Gate Saga. The Baldur's Gate Saga really kind of made RPGs, in my opinion, true to form. It took almost everything and basically did it at an expert level. It has a really, really great storyline. The first one is very open world. The second one opens up into open world, and you can basically go ahead and do whatever it is that you want. It's not open world in the sense of what people today think open world is, in the sense that like there's all these different areas you can go to, but there's a lot of different maps and things that you can go to, and the main storyline is maybe 15 hours, and you can spend 100 hours on the game. Very
It has a
easily.
really robust character creation too, from what
Yeah,
I remember.
it's very true to form to Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition. There is some creative differences just to make it more game-like, like a computer game-like. Uh, but yeah, especially since the enhanced editions are out for the Baldur's Gate Saga, it's even better and easier for people to play and get into. I would say if you don't like an RPG that is very like rudimentary and its storytelling and its like character development and stuff like that, and the amount of time that is required for it, this might be a bad suggestion for you. But if you like all that stuff, then definitely Baldur's Gate, especially if you played any of the later BioWare games and you've never actually played this game. Black Isle and BioWare did a wonderful job with this. It's definitely one of the best examples of an RPG out there.
Wasn't the second one multiplayer too?
Both of them are
Oh,
multiplayer, actually.
I didn't
You
know.
can see if you want to play a Infinity Engine game that's multiplayer, a better game would potentially be Icewind Dale.
Okay.
And the reason why is because at the beginning you select all 6 of your characters, and the game is designed around the 6 characters that way. In Baldur's Gate, you can play multiplayer, although what happens is one person's like the main character, like player one, and then the other person is just an attached character
Just a
there.
Luigi.
Yeah, and so they basically are still there, and you get to control it, and you can select who controls what characters, just in the exact same way as any of the just like Icewind Dale. However, the thing is that because there's so many NPCs in Baldur's Gate, where there's no NPCs in Icewind Dale,
Oh,
the fact that if you like playing with the NPCs, then you're kind of limiting your NPC selection, and it's more geared towards a style of single player aspect rather than a multiplayer aspect. Because Icewind Dale is more of a dungeon crawl rather than with a an intricate story behind that dungeon crawl, rather than a very intricate story and adventure and a world around that story. So Baldur's Gate's a more single player experience, rather when Icewind Dale is a more multiplayer experience. I
Okay.
have a lot of fond memories
Good to
playing
know.
multiplayer with my friends in Icewind Dale. In fact, many of the friends that I have who play role playing games with and stuff like that, a lot of them I've played Icewind Dale with. But Baldur's Gate, I've only really played with one of my friends multiplayer in that game, and though it is very enjoyable, but that's the differences in multiplayer with the two of them. Yeah. And the last game on my list is a game that I waited years for. I think a lot of people don't understand that this game was actually in development for like 6 or 7 years. And a lot of that was conceptualization and design because BioWare, the game is Dragon Age Origins. BioWare was talking about this game like very shortly after they finished Neverwinter Nights. And they were talking about this game that they had the ideas for, and they had a couple of screenshots of artwork and stuff like that of like just their concepts and stuff like that. And then they didn't talk about it for like years, and then they started talking about it, and all of a sudden it was coming out. And yeah, Dragon Age Origins is very high adventure game, just like Baldur's Gate. It's a little bit more modern. It's
See, maybe that was my issue. I was never high for that adventure, and I could never get into it.
maybe, but it's a great game. The first game is the game that sticks out the most to me. It plays a little bit different on the PC than it does on the console,
Yes.
and it's more of a it's more of a traditional BioWare game, like a Baldur's Gate game on the PC, where it's more of an action turn-based game on the consoles, and both are very good. They're just interesting how it's different, and I think the reason why is because this game was in development for quite a long time, and it was originally just going to be a PC game, and
That
then
makes sense.
as EA bought BioWare, it was during this they were like, no, you're releasing on everything that is possible because that's what EA does. And they kind of changed some mechanics so that it was easier to play on a console, basically, to do that. And this is kind of like the last game that BioWare had almost full control over, in my opinion, anyway. And yeah, it's a really great game. Its storyline and Ferelden and the games that spawned off of it are great. I'm apprehensively looking forward to the fourth one. We'll see. And yeah, hopefully uh, the IP continues on and does great things. But those are my top RPG recommendations and Ian's top recommendations.
Yeah. So, um, yeah. Let us know what your favorite RPGs are.
Hmm.
Right down there in the comments.
Yeah. And we'll see you next time. We release episode every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
And yeah, be sure to like and subscribe.